and welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. As you can see, today we're doing a rerun. I've just had one of those weeks where things keep slipping away from me, so I hope you guys understand and enjoy this rerun. It's from last year, and I go over the top 10 longest living houseplants. It's a really fun one that I enjoyed recording, and I hope that you will enjoy listening to it. Before I start it, though, I do want to say I'm going to be doing a giveaway for sure next week. So, if you want to enter and you listen on Spotify, respond to the little trivia question that I put in there every week. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you want to enter in, leave a review and I will be choosing one from each. I'm really trying to cater to those two main platforms where a majority of my listeners are. For this upcoming giveaway, I will be giving away a free plant. I will have more details in the next episode. I appreciate all of your support as a listener, and again, I hope you enjoy this rerun about the top 10 longest living houseplants. Welcome to another week of Plant School. So happy to have you here listening. Today, I wanted to do something kind of light and fun. For those of us here in the US, a holiday weekend is coming up, 4th of July. So I wanted to cover the top longest living houseplants. So there's quite a few of them that I found. I did a lot of research on which ones live the longest so that I can give you guys the best answers. But before I jump into that, I wanted to cover some things about the longest living houseplants. First and foremost being, why are we even interested in the longest living houseplants? So number one, if your plant lives a long time, you don't have to buy the same one again and again and be wasting your money. And of course, I want to say there is a learning curve for everyone getting into houseplants. So show yourself some grace definitely if you kill a few houseplants, especially when you're first starting out, because you do get better and you do learn after each one. As sad as it is, when you kill a plant, you can learn a lot from that and hopefully you're less likely to do it again. So that's why I recommend starting off with something very easy, something like a pothos snake plant, peace lily, heartleaf philodendron. Those are all some of my top houseplants that are almost foolproof. Because if you make mistakes with any of those plants, they are less likely to die. They're really forgiving. And so I think our number one reason for why we're interested in longest living houseplants is just so that we aren't buying them again and again and wasting our money. We want our money to go a long way. We want to be enjoying these plants for a long time, which leads me to my second question is, how long should a houseplant be living in the first place? So if your plant is taken care of, they can be around for decades. Some have been even known to last centuries, which blows my mind. But on a minimum, they will last you at least 2 to 5 years. But honestly, they should be lasting you 10 years or more if you are taking care of them. And as I was looking into this, of course, I ran into some fun historical stories about the longest living plants, like house plants. And so I wanted to share those with you. First one, there is a woman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she had a philodendron that was more than 40 years old, so really old. And she actually put this plant in her will with an inheritance so that it would be taken care of. Because if the plant was taken care of, you would get the inheritance. I think that's hilarious. That sounds like something I would do. Hey kids, if you want my money when I'm gone, you best be taking care of all these plants that I've been growing for my entire life. And moving on, I ran into a story about the oldest potted plant. So I don't know if you could technically call this a houseplant, although I think this plant does survive indoors, but this one is the oldest potted plant that we know of. So it's an Eastern Cape cycad, and cycads, they look very similar to a palm, but this potted plant is in Kew Garden, and it was documented as having been potted in 1775, and it's still alive to this very day. It's over 242 years old. Isn't that crazy? I guess for here in 2022, we can be precise. It's 247 years old. I'm kind of like kicking myself because I've learned a lot of really cool history and facts that somehow relate back to Kew Garden. And some of you may know this if you've been following me, but I actually traveled to see my sister in London, and we went to Kew Garden. We went into this greenhouse where the oldest potted plant is in the world, and I had no idea. So I feel like now I need to go back so I can go and look at it and appreciate it. I'm sure I walked past it and I was just so naive and had no idea how spectacular it really was. But this plant, it was actually put on board a ship from South Africa to London. It took several months to get there, and they actually strapped it to the deck so that it could be getting rainwater as it was traveling. And then it was put on a barge down the Thames River to Kew Garden, where it still lives to this day. So it's in the Palm House if you ever go or if you live in the area, and it grows about 2.5 centimeters a year, so pretty slow growing at this point, but it is so big that it has multiple props, like poles, that it is leaning on because it cannot support itself. It's massive. And then there are some other stories. There's aspidistras, which are cast iron plants, at Wisley Gardens, which is in the UK, and they are reported to be over 100 years old. So really old cast iron plants. And then, of course, I can't move on from this question without mentioning bonsais, because bonsais, they're technically potted plants. Some of them reside in homes. I feel like most of them are kept in greenhouses or outside, especially the ones that I'm going to talk about, because they have been around for so long and are so priceless. Like, they're amazing. So there are some bonsai trees in Japan that have been reported to be over 800 years old, just passed down from generation in a family where they take meticulous care of them. It's considered an art form, and I totally agree with that. They are beautiful, and one day I would love to see a Japanese bonsai like in its native country in Japan. And as far as longest living houseplants, those were all of the main stories that I was running into. So I want to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to cover how to make your plant live a long time, and then what plants are known to live the longest in your home. Have you ever considered making a podcast? Well, Spotify has a great platform that lets you make them very easily, distribute them everywhere. You can even earn money while doing so, and it's all in one place. And the best part, it's all for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and it's really simple to get started. So you record and edit your podcast right from your phone, your computer, whichever one that you like. And then when you publish them, they distribute your podcast directly to Spotify and also everywhere else that podcasts are heard. You can do video podcasts, you can interact with your audience with Q&As and polls. And once they're up and running, like I mentioned before, you can even earn money through your podcast in a variety of ways through things like ads and podcast subscriptions. And of course, it's totally free to use. There is no catch. When I started Plant School, I used Spotify for Podcasters, and I continue to use it because I love it. It's super easy to use, and it gives me everything that I need as a podcaster. So if you have ever wanted to start your own podcast, I highly recommend that you try out Spotify for Podcasters. You can download the app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Listen to the 48 Hours podcast for shocking murder cases and compelling real-life dramas from one of television's most watched true crime shows. Go behind the scenes of each episode with award-winning CBS News correspondents and producers in Postmortem, a weekly deep dive. Listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, we're back and diving right back in. How do you make your houseplant live a long time? Number one rule is basically just pay attention to your plant. Check the soil before you water. I say this in like every episode. For those of you who listen are probably so sick of this. For those of you who are new, I'm adamant about this because it really helps you not overwater your plant. Just every now and then, every few days, check the soil of your plant. If it feels wet or soggy at all, don't water it. If it feels really dry, give it some water, and it greatly decreases any problems you might run into with over or under watering. Also, just be looking out for pests, for any new growth, discolored leaves. Just pay attention to your plant, like I said. And when you notice something that kind of worries you, look it up and try and figure out what may be wrong. This process of figuring out what's wrong really gets easier as you gain more and more experience with plants over time, which may include a few of them dying. It's just the way the process goes. But over time, you get better and better at it. Second thing to help your plant live a long time is give it the right soil. If it's a desert or succulent plant, give it a well-draining succulent soil. If it prefers rich soil, get houseplant potting mix. How do you know what kind of soil your plant likes? You Google it. That is literally my simple answer. I could go through every plant and tell you, or I've done multiple care guide episodes on this podcast and you can look it up and listen to those. But the easiest way is probably just to Google it. Third thing, give them drainage holes. No drainage holes on your pot increases the risk for overwatering and root rot because the water has nowhere to go. It just sits in the bottom of your pot. The fungi in the soil take advantage of the wet environment and eat the roots, which kills them and kills your plant. Another big one is to give your plant proper lighting. Most houseplants prefer lots of indirect sunlight and grow well there. Even if your plant says it's a low light plant, honestly, I don't know how many plants actually do that well in low light. They're mostly just surviving in low light. Most of them just need bright indirect light, and not enough light leads to slow growth. It increases your risk for overwatering because they aren't uptaking as much water very quickly because they aren't in a lot of sunshine. So definitely try and give all your houseplants bright indirect light. Next thing is to fertilize them a few times a year at the very least. I know fertilizing seems like something extra and something that may be a little scary because you don't want to hurt your plant, but it can really help your plant keep going for years and for years. Look up the best routine for that plant, or again, you can listen to a care guide episode on this podcast if I've covered it, and I go over fertilization in every single one. And if you do these things, your plant is likely to last for years and years. A long-living plant doesn't necessarily come because of its species. It's not like it's a genetic thing of this plant lives forever indoors and this one doesn't. It's more of how you care for it. Some are just more durable than others, and those typically last longer. And those are the ones that I'm going to be recommending. The ones that are durable, and if you care for them, can last you for decades. So before I get into the ones that I researched, personally for me, the ones that have stuck around the longest plant-wise, I have quite a few that have been with me for a while. My very first houseplant is still with me. It was a peace lily from a greenhouse that I worked at on my campus, and it doesn't flower anymore, but I still have it. It's still doing great. And then my next kind of wave of houseplants came in from my interior plants class. Honestly, I was not spending money on plants when I first got into this. I was in college and I am just not a big spender. And so I got a lot of plants from this class, and I probably took home about a dozen or so. It was a lot at the time. My husband was like, can you please stop bringing one home after every class? But I've kept a lot of them alive, which is great. So with me still, I have pothos, dracaenas, heartleaf philodendrons. I have a bonsai ficus that's lasted me, and an air plant. I think that's about it as far as that class goes. And on the flip side of that, I did kill one of the air plants that we got. I have killed a peace lily. I've killed so many succulents. It's not even funny. And I've killed multiple cuttings of different plants. And that has all kind of gone into the learning process for me of how to care for these plants. And another note that I did want to throw in, that while I was working for my university's greenhouse, we cared for all the plants all around campus. It's a pretty big campus, and we were in charge of watering them, replacing them if anything happened. And some of the most common plants I saw that did really well, no matter where they were, and I think would do really well as houseplants and last a long time, are rubber trees, trees, snake plants, aglaonema plants, or Chinese evergreen, they're also called that. We had a lot of pothos plants and umbrella trees. All of those did so well, and I know that we chose them because they lasted a long time. So those are also ones that I definitely recommend. All right, so getting into the houseplants that are actually known to live the longest, they're the most durable. If you're giving them the right care, they will last you for decades. So I scoured the internet for opinions of longest living houseplants. Honestly, there weren't like a huge amount of articles. I don't think this is a super popular topic, but I read every single article I could find. I found 9 official articles that I felt really good about, and I tallied up the results on what they recommended. Some of them got 9 out of 9, and others got like 1 out of 9. So you take it for, what it is, and you decide which ones you want to try out. But these are definitely ones that I would recommend that live a long time. They're very durable, and if you give them the right care, they will be with you. And maybe you will put them in your will for your children to take care of so they can have an inheritance. So we're going to start at the bottom, the 1 out of 9s. I would say these are like the honorable mentions. They got some votes. So bamboo, dracaenas, and scheffleras, which dracaenas and scheffleras, I'd have no experience with bamboo, so sorry bamboo, I can't speak for you, but dracaenas and scheffleras definitely I think are very hardy plants and will last you a long time. Next are our 2 out of 9s, and that was bird of paradise and monsteras. They were voted as living a very long time. 3 out of 9, we have air plants, cast iron plants, which remember, there is historical evidence of some living for as long as 100 years. And then next, for 3 out of 9 as well, Boston fern, peace lily, and orchids. Orchids surprised me, maybe because I don't have one and I don't have any experience with them. I just feel like they're a plant that get a bad rap because they're given out for Mother's Day and then the flower dies and people just chuck them out. But I think if you keep them around after they flower and you aren't watering them with an ice cube, because that's a big no-no, I think they can last for quite a while. Moving on up to our 4 out of 9, so 4 articles recommended these plants. We have English ivy, Benjamin ficus, and the ag plant, or the Chinese evergreen aglaonema plants. That was one I mentioned that were everywhere at our university. I also see them a lot in malls. They're just a really good plant to survive in a lot of locations. Next plants coming at 5 articles out of the 9, we have the pothos plant, ZZ plant, Hoyas, and philodendrons. Hoyas and philodendrons are really broad families, but there are experts out there that recommend them as having them stick around and live for a long time. There were 2 plants that got voted 6 times out of the 9 articles. That was the Christmas cactus and the rubber tree. I think the rubber tree was another one that I saw all around our campus. And Christmas cactus I think is such a fun one. I've heard of Christmas cactuses being handed down from generation to generation. They're a really long-lasting plant. And 7 out of 9, we had one plant that got 7 recommendations out of the 9 articles, and that was the sago palm / cycads. Sago palm is just a type of cycad, but these plants look very similar to palms, so they are not in the palm family. They kind of have like thicker needle-like leaves. They've been around for centuries. They're some of the older plants that we have here on Earth, which I think is so cool, and they last such a long time indoors. All right, we're getting close to a perfect score. We have 8 out of 9. There was one plant that got 8 out of 9, and that was the spider plant. I feel like the spider plant is such a classic one that has been around forever and well loved by so many generations. And lastly, 9 out of 9. So out of the 9 official articles that were really reputable, these plants were recommended every single time. Number 1 was cacti / succulents. This one kind of blew my mind because succulents, I'm just not very gifted with succulents. I've gotten better, but as a beginner, I kept killing them because I kept watering them too much. But apparently, if you don't do that, like beginner Rachel did, they will last a very long time. I do have a cactus that is doing great, and I have high hopes that it'll be around for a while. And I've known people that have like big cactuses that like their grandfather had and they passed it down to them. So I definitely know that they can do that. I just haven't seen it for myself, and I'm hopeful that I can be that kind of person that can keep cactuses and succulents alive. They're great for people who forget to water. That's all I can say. And then number 2, 9 out of 9 score was the snake plant, the beloved snake plant. I just feel like this is such a winner. Another deserty plant that does well when you forget about it. And if you take the proper care for it, it does amazing indoors. And it's just another great durable plant. Honestly, any of the plants that I have mentioned on these lists, even if they got a 1 out of 9, I would definitely recommend them as being a durable houseplant that can live a long time. Some articles were very thorough with what they listed and others just listed a few. And so that's probably why some of them got more votes than others did. But honestly, all of them I think are great options if you're looking for a plant that will stay with you for your whole life if you take really great care of it. And that does it for today's episode. That wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for being here and listening to the Plant School podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review. It really helps my podcast grow. I know when I first started this podcast, it was pretty rough. My episodes weren't very polished or anything. So I actually have some reviews that were pretty mean about that as I was first starting and figuring this thing out. And they hurt me at the time. I'm over them now. But it really helps to get up-to-date reviews that this podcast is sharing good information and helping people. It takes like 5 seconds to plug in, 5 stars if you want to. That would mean the world to me. But it would really help me out. Doesn't cost you anything. But with that being said, I hope you guys have a great week. For all you Americans out there, I hope you have a great 4th of July weekend. And I hope to have you here next week to listen in to the Plant School podcast. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast. And I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode. And you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School podcast.